Good evening. Call to order the City of Cedar Falls Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019. If we could have the roll call, please. Ms. Howard?
Atkins?
Here.
Hartley?
Here.
Holst? Larson?
Here.
Leeper?
Here.
Oberly?
Here.
Saul? Wingert?
Here.
Thank you. Next is our approval of minutes from our January 9th commission meeting. Are there any comments or corrections to those meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Our minutes are approved. At this point, we'll open up for any public comments anyone would like to make. If you'd like to make a public comment, please approach the microphone and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none, we have one item of old business. This is the College Hill Neighborhood Overlay District Site Plan Review for 2119 College Street. This item has been deferred per the January 9th commission meeting. This item was deferred until City Council considers proposed zoning code amendments for the College Hill Overlay Zoning District. So with that, we will move on to our new business items. The first of which is a land use map amendment and rezoning for the southeast corner of Union Road and West 12th Street. And Mr. Sturch, if you would give us the background information on this item.
Thank you, Mrs. Oberly. Yes, this first item here is a discussion and introduction and discussion of this rezoning and land use map amendment request for a 42-acre parcel at the southeast corner of 12th Street and Union Road. The property is located in A1 Agricultural Zoning District, and the proposal is to change that to an RP planned residential district. So moving along with the RP district, a submittal of a concept development plan is required, plus a developmental agreement, and I'll get that into that a little bit later. But the idea is to develop this area for a 55-plus residential community for the new Aldea campus there at that location, looking at 1- and 2-family dwelling units and multifamily dwelling units located up at the northwest corner of the site and one down a little bit south of there. Another component on this is this is set up to be just over 3 to 3.5 units per acre based on that 42 acres. It is considered low-density residential. The idea is to have this campus for the residents with open space amenities, trails, interior trails, and sidewalks along the edges and along the roadways. There is a recreational trail planned along Union Road, and that is identified with in 2020 for a 10-foot trail from 12th Street south to 27th Street. So again, part of that trail alignment is adjacent to this development. Another component on this development is as we get into the rezoning and platting on this site, looking at 17-foot right-of-way dedication there along the south side of 12th Street, and that is adjacent to the north side of this area. So as we look at rezoning criteria for property, we want to take a look at 3 different items. One is this request consistent with the future land use map and comprehensive plan? Is the property readily accessible to sanitary sewer service? And then does this property have adequate roadway access? So moving into the land use component of it, our current land use map really identifies the whole property as green space and floodplain. Those characteristics, is similar to parks and recreational areas, environmentally sensitive areas, stormwater management, and trail systems through that area. So that's identified in the comprehensive plan. Well, staff has looked at this site and proposed a land use map change based on the existing characteristics of that property for planned development and maintaining that floodplain that runs through the middle of the site. So with that in mind, approximately 31% is in the floodplain, so that leaves over just under 70% of that development or property for development. As part of this, we look at stormwater management facilities and drainage facilities, so we want to maintain that component of that land use. Again, we mentioned trails. adjacent to the site and within the site, and sidewalks in area. And just surrounding this property, there are open space and parks. We have Birdsdale Park along the north side of 12th Street, along with the golf course, and then the Robinson Dresser complex there on the east side of that. So it kind of makes sense to recommend that change. Second item is a sanitary sewer there. It does run through the middle of the site in the drainage way, and that was set up a while back for the Cherrywood's sanitary sewer to access that western part of town. So the existing sewer runs through there, so the site will extend off of that sewer line. There are sewer tapping fees required for that within that district. Water main does run across, run along 12th Street and Union Road. And so as those plans and contracts come in, water will be extended off that along with storm sewers and gas and electric. But there is also a water connection fee for that as when those water lines went in at the time. Another feature is roadway access. Does this site have roadway access? Is there roads served in that area? So basically along the north side of the site, you got 12th Street, and along the west side of the site, there you have Union Road, and those current facilities support this type of development, future development. The idea, like for Union Road, that carries roughly 3,000 vehicles a day, and that type of facility, as it's designed now, could accommodate up to 1,700 vehicles an hour. So that's something that staff will take a look at as this site's developed, as everything else is developed in this western part of town. Across the street, we have Wild Horse that will expand, and south of this area, along with a possible high school, and you and I, we want to maintain and keep a careful eye on that as that expands for residential areas. We'll take a look at those future roadways, plan and program and budget those any improvements along those roadways, which is basically collectors and arterials along 12th and Union and including 27th Street. So this development also provides neighborhood connections to the east and the south, and those connections are there just as development occurs in those lots. The idea is we don't want to isolate this site from the rest of the neighborhood. We want to make sure traffic is circulated through those neighborhoods and it disperses through those areas. It's an efficient system that carries the vehicles out to those arterials around the border. So again, as that development continues, that's something that the city will monitor for any future improvements to those corridors. Other factors in this area, we look at existing floodplain, and that area is identified in a red shaded area, and that's what we have in the floodplain maps now. And as you can see, that floodplain does encroach into some of the planned homes in that area. And there's also an existing drainage way that takes in the drainage and runoff from the west side of Union Road as that Wild Horse development was developed. Their drainage and stormwater plan basically carries that water to the ditch along the west side of Union Road, and then it travels under the road through that drainage area now and empties into the stream. So that's something that the developer and engineer will have to keep in mind and make sure that that is maintained, and because this site will receive that water. So that's part of the plating process. Other factors is, again, as this develops, we really can't do much with the existing floodplain, so that's going to have to be changed to accommodate this as this carries through the plating process. So the developer's engineer is modeling that drainage way to reduce the width of that floodplain so it can work with this development. They will have to do some modeling for that street crossing to make sure that doesn't impact the floodplain. It doesn't create a no-rise effect through that area. So those items are all identified in that floodplain modeling, and that's something that's underway right now, and that's what we want to make sure we have that during the plating stage. Additional items that we would look at here, since this is an RP district, those multi-use dwellings will come back before the commission for design review and site plan review. So it'd be a separate item under consideration in the future. But those elements would provide that opportunity for the applicant maybe to work with adjacent property owners to hear some of their concerns and ideas for that type of development. Some ways to look at creating some larger structures that would help blend in the neighborhood and the site would be, architectural elements and alternating facades, roof line appearances and landscaping to make sure that those buildings fit well with the site. So again, those are all elements that are contained in the developmental agreement. So that agreement is basically narrative of this graphic representation of the concept there. So we're working with developing that agreement, working with the applicant and staff to come up with that. So with that in mind, we would like just to gather comments and hear some discussion from the commission and public for this site and continue the discussion at the next meeting.
Thank you. At this point, following our normal presentation order for agenda items, ask if the applicant is here present, would like to make any comments. Seeing none, we will go ahead and we'll open it up for public comments. I want to note first that the Commission's received email correspondence from Nick Raffanello, so that item is noted that's before the Commission as well. If there's anyone present who would like to speak to the Commission or ask questions, please approach the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk. My name is Scott Hagberg, and I represent the Wild Horse Ridge HOA Board of Directors. And I want to start off with saying that if New Aldea moved out by us, we would have no problem. They would be great neighbors, all right? So this is just some concerns. We only had 6 days to review this, so we're going to get back together and talk some more, and hopefully we can talk to the developers. But in the documentation, we're really concerned about the new FEMA floodplain that's going to be reviewed in 18 to 20 months. We're curious at why this request is being submitted now and not after that review is done. Since it is currently a floodplain, why would we not want to take a look at FEMA? And then our second concern along that line is how much hard space, roadways, roofs, construction that would now turn that property into water runoff versus giving an opportunity to soak into the fields. So our main concern over on Wild Horse at this moment would be the water and how that flows. A side concern one member brought up would be how close the structures are to the limit line. It's 35 feet back from Union. Mr. Sturch knows we had some problem over in that easement restriction with the city and the water flow and the engineer work. And so we'd want the developer to make sure they take a look at how close that is and maybe future Union Road growth. Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak to the item?
Well, background, so you know, my name is Mark Sigworth. I live at 1028 Cherrywood Drive, and that's adjacent to the area that you're talking about. I have a few issues I'd like to speak to you about in regards to the proposed rezoning and development. 3 of them. First one has been mentioned by the city and briefly by the gentleman behind me is stormwater management. The area that you're talking about and the area that I live in was zoned back in 1970, long before it was annexed into the city. In 1970, it was zoned as agricultural, and it was done for a couple different reasons. First, there's natural and man-made runoff that was utilized and approved by the city, previous projects. The second thing is a good portion of the property that you're talking about is in the 100-year floodplain zone, as you're well aware of. Currently it is currently listed, as you stated up there on your nice little PowerPoint, that it is a floodplain and a greenway floodplain. It's listed for reasons due to the amount of water runoff into that area from the surrounding properties. The main ones being the city-owned golf course to the north, Robinson Dressler Complex to the east and the northeast, Wild Horse Subdivision, which is to the west, and Cherrywood Acres and Autumn Ridge, which is to the west and to the northwest. I have a couple questions. I don't know if you can answer them or not. Anyone on the board tonight, do any of you live in or close to the area that we're talking about? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. Anyone on the board tonight, have you been affiliated with the city or in this position for at least 15 years when decisions have been made to this area and the surrounding developments? Has anyone seen what happens in this area of question when we receive, say, a half an inch of rain to 2 inches of rain? Have you actually gone out to that area and watched what happens? Okay? How about 2 to 4 inches of rain? Over 4, or when the ground is saturated. Has anyone actually taken the time when we do receive rain, which is in the summer, spring, and fall, to see how much runoff actually comes to this area that you're talking about? The area in question changes very quickly when we receive any type of rain due to the amount of runoff funneled there, and it is funneled there from all these different areas that I spoke about. Let's talk about that. I don't think you can you pull up the drawing or an area of what we're talking about so I can maybe explain to them? You had a nice PowerPoint. Perfect, right there. There's 4 different areas. City-owned golf course to the north. If you look at the intersection of 12th and Union and you go to the east, which you go past the nice little blue buildings, you're going to get to basically where Alexis Boulevard is. I don't know if you're aware of what I'm talking about there, okay? That right underneath Alexis Boulevard is where all the water from the southwest corner of the city-owned golf course is funneled. All of it goes to one tile. And that tile goes under 12th Street, which goes into the floodplain, which is, again, the 100-year floodplain. In addition to that, you have Robinson Dressler, the baseball diamond, which is also tiled into that floodplain. The Wild Horse subdivision on the west side of the road has 2 tiles that run across, underneath Union Road and into this property, and then supposedly into this 100-year floodplain. I don't know if you've seen one when it rains, but when it does rain in any substantial amount, the ditch area on Union Road is filled because those 2 tiles can't even take all the water that's coming from their subdivision to put it across the road into the area that's in question. Lastly, Cherrywood Acres and Autumn Ridge, which is on the northwest corner. To give you a little background, all of the drainage from Cherrywood goes into one tile. That tile goes across 12th Street and goes into the same tile that is supposed to take all the water off the golf course. I'm trying to paint you a picture that you have no idea how much water is coming off all those properties and going into this 100-year floodplain. A lot. That 100-year floodplain is there for a reason. And right now, it's not adequately doing what it's supposed to do. It's not handling what it's supposed to do, and we want to make the situation worse. I ask these questions. If you haven't witnessed the land transformation during the rain runoff in the last 20 years, you have no idea what we're doing, and you're incredibly misinformed, whether it be by your city personnel or the contractor who's trying to make some money. I ask you to table this for a long way down the road and physically go out there during a rainstorm. Please don't rely on photos that are taken on a nice, sunny, dry day from Google Map coming down. That's not going to give you a picture. And don't rely on information from a third party who a lot of times has ulterior motives. Listen to myself and maybe other residents that want to stand up tonight that have lived in that area for over 20 years. Myself, I've lived there for 22 years. I've seen what happens. I'm going to give you a little history so you understand this, because none of you were here years ago when all this came down. In the late 1990s, the Autumn Ridge development, which is north of Cedar, north of the Cherrywood Acres. So we have Cherrywood Acres in the northwest corner of the subdivision there. And on north of that, there was Autumn Ridge, which was proposed. That development was proposed. Myself and approximately 40 other residents from the Cherrywood area expressed concerns at that meeting. It was at the golf course. It was at the city-owned golf course on the same property that we're talking about where the water comes off. And we were concerned that the development would change the ground runoff and the water tables around our homes. We were told by the city planning and zoning at that time that it wouldn't happen. That runoff would be directed towards the golf course, through the property, which was later developed as Alexis Drive, that wasn't even there at the time, and into the area what we're talking about today. We were told that that land southeast of the intersection, the land that we're talking about right now, was zoned for agricultural and would stay that way. That it would never be developed because all that water needs a place to properly drain, and it's in the 100-year floodplain. If you don't believe me, go back to the minutes. We all expressed concerns. We were all told, don't worry. The water problem will be taken care of, which it's not. If we get a good rain, water's across 12th Street, water's across Union Road. Where that tile goes across 12th Street, there's a reason 12th Street had to be redone, because it got washed out because of all the water coming from there, down to that 100-year floodplain. Since that meeting, since the development, our groundwater levels have changed, they've risen. The water table has risen. More and more homes have been built around us. There's more roof lines, there's more concrete. The current system of drainage is inadequate. And now you want to consider making it worse. My second concern, traffic. Union Road and 12th Street already have way too much traffic. With the various housing additions that have been added to the north and the south, along with commuters along Union Road to bypass the majority of the city, it's a quick way to get around. It carries too much traffic already. By adding this so-called campus, and I read the paperwork, it's called a campus, it's going to make it a lot worse. The first entrance on Union Road south of 12th Street is less than 500 feet from the intersection, and the second one 400 feet farther down, which is going to meet up with Sonoma Drive. If anybody lives in Wild Horse, it's during certain times of the day, it's very difficult to come out, and now we want to make this essentially worse. And Union Road, you're going to have a Lexus Boulevard, and you want to bring that south into this subdivision, again, creating more traffic. Both roads have a posted speed limit of 45 miles per hour. The volume of traffic, the speeds, and the traffic currently right now is bad enough. To increase it significantly is not safe, trust me, it's not. You're asking for troubles. Third thing, the type of structure that's being proposed. The area in and around 12th and Union comprises of almost all single-family homes. The campus, which is being proposed, does not fit the surrounding property developments. Building a 2- or 3-story multi-unit building at the intersection near these single homes would be an eyesore, and simply it does not fit. A campus such as this belongs in another part of the city that has similar structures. We don't have anything close to that, people. I spoke to a realtor yesterday because I'm concerned. And I said, hey, what's this going to do to my home value? And he said, without a doubt, your home and everyone else's home, as far as the property value, will decrease because this just doesn't fit in the area where you live. Question to all of you, and don't answer it, just think about it. Would any of you want a 2- or 3-story multi-unit building being put next to your home or the subdivision that you live inside the city of Cedar Falls? You're placed on this commission to make good, sound decisions for residents like myself and these other people. Would you want to look out your window and see 3 stories of a building where you once were able to look across and see a floodplain, water moving, and see the Unidome? But now you're going to look out every day and see that. Put yourself in our shoes, because that's your job. You're supposed to look out for all of us, not just a contractor, not just the almighty buck, but the citizens that have been here for years and years and years. Ladies and gentlemen, we already have a campus in Cedar Falls. It has dormitories and multiple multi-unit buildings. And if you haven't figured out, that's the University of Northern Iowa. The proposed project and the proposed rezoning is not conducive to the neighborhood near and around 12th and Union. As stated in the background area of the proposal that I pulled up online, and you have right in front of you, quote unquote, the rezoning of this property must be carefully considered by evaluating the characteristics of the land and surrounding properties. I would ask that you carefully consider the various points I'm speaking about and maybe other people after me or before me. To recap, those 3 issues are simply this. Stormwater management, it's a 100-year floodplain, leave it alone. Traffic concerns, bad enough already, don't make it worse. The type of structure being proposed is not appropriate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any others? President would like to speak to the commission.
I'm Mike Goen. I live at 1712 Union Road, and I really don't have a lot of concerns that haven't been expressed, but some of the farming practices on the land next to me has caused some problems, and it's either water tables are going up or the drainage is not as good as it used to be, and my ground does not dry out like it used to be. And when I look at the map, it's got the little kind of a jog at the end of our properties, those lots that are already there. And so I'm a little concerned that will you address the current drain off water from our areas, or whether that area kind of drops out, that they build it up, but then maybe it's backing up so we don't drain as well.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name's Craig Schnodderst. I live on the corner of 12th and Union. That's the back of my house. Mark is a neighbor. He's not lying about that water. when that water comes through there, it looks like a small river. That's just not some little waterway. It's huge. I've seen it across that road before. You build that in there, it's just going to get worse. You won't have enough room for them. And when I look out my back door, the last thing I want to see is a 3-story building on that corner. So here it is. I want to fix up my house. I want to side it. I want to remodel it inside. And I'm going to have to wait until they decide whether or not they're going to put that development in there. If they do, I will have to sell my house. If I go ahead and remodel it, I've wasted all that money. I just want you to know that he's not lying about that water. And the water tables have gone up. I never had water in my basement until they built that addition up there, and all of a sudden, I'm getting moisture. My lawn won't dry out. My sump pump's running all the time, so just some consideration. Please, if nothing else, don't let them put a 3-story building on that corner. I mean, that is an eyesore beyond all belief. Think about it. If you looked out your back door and went, I can see the wilderness, I can see the Unidome, all of a sudden, here's this block building 3 stories high. Okay, that's all I got to say. Thank you.
My name is Mike Gersh. I live at 1608 Union Road. I have the largest stretch of land, over 1,200 feet, that adjoins the property. Some of my property also drains into this proposed development, and I would want to make sure that all that was maintained so no water was backed up on my property. And that's about the only concern I have. I want to make sure that the lay of the land stays pretty much the same. And I know they had to level a lot of land like at Wild Horse, so I would want to make sure that nothing was filled in so that more water was backed up. Thank you.
Anyone else? We will go ahead and close public comment at this point and allow commission comment, discuss, ask staff questions.
Like it on the record that on this one I'll have to abstain.
Let it be noted, Mr. Wingert will be abstaining.
I guess I would ask the applicant if is there a broader review of the watershed being done than just this property? Do we understand what's coming and what's going?
Yes, we have reviewed.
Would you step
you
to the
come up
mic,
to the-
please?
You would state your name and address for us as well.
John Biederman, civil engineer with Fairgram. Yes, we have reviewed the floodplain. Actually, as you're aware, there's many different versions of that floodplain map that are in existence, especially over time. Most recent version has a flood profile established with it. We have reviewed that based on the existing ground, applied that profile to the existing ground, which is more accurate than anything that, that is published today. And that's basically what we're showing. So, yeah, I mean, we've definitely looked at the floodplain situation.
Are you familiar with the comment made first about the FEMA floodplain review?
Yes.
And can you give us some insight into that process or the timing of that?
That's a DNR-initiated project, and I believe, is that August of 2021 that's scheduled to kind of become effective?
We are currently reviewing preliminary flood maps through the whole city, and the whole process carries through, again, through probably the fall of 2020, so 18 to 20 months. But as this project moves forward, those changes to the floodplain could be done quicker than that by just submitting what was called a LOMA, letter of map amendment, based on, again, the hydrology, the ground shots, and the profiles of that cross-section.
Do we understand how those preliminary maps are impacting this site? I know it's not set in stone yet.
Yeah, the preliminary map that they're using takes the profile that FEMA has provided in their flood insurance study and applied it to LiDAR surface. LiDAR is not exact. We have field surveyed the area and applied the same profile and have come up with the line that matches what FEMA is stating today for elevation.
Is it safe to say that those areas are expanding rather than
It's actually smaller.
contracting?
Smaller based on the FEMA profile, which is what they use as an effective product.
Can you address any of the residents' concerns? Are we going to make this better? Are we going to solve
Certainly
any of those problems?
we're certainly maintaining the floodplain. I mean, there's no intent to reduce that or eliminate that at all. I mean, we can't. So that part is certainly will be in place. The water that comes from the west in those two locations, I mean, we're planning on transferring that through. As far as backing up, I see no issue with that. We have enough slope on our side. It would be very hard for us to restrict what comes across the road. You know, they're up high enough and it comes through, and there's no intent to try to restrict that at all.
Is there intent to improve the broader conditions that have been described tonight? Or is your anticipation that those issues are staying the same?
We will carry through the water that comes from the west. I mean, that's really out of our control. We have to allow that to pass through. What comes from the north, I think one of the residents stated there's a culvert under 12th that comes through. Obviously, we have to accept that. You know, I've heard from time to time that water does flow over 12th, that the culvert, you know, isn't probably sized large enough. And, you know, the floodplain, we're just going off the profile that's been established. So that's what we're working with and maintaining. There are some ways we can probably increase the capacity of that floodplain. If you look at it today, it has scoured out probably a 2-foot deep channel. We can widen that out. I mean, that's the depth it wants to be at, is an additional 2 foot of depth. If we remove some material from the side, that's that much more capacity that it theoretically could handle.
I guess from my perspective, I'm hearing a lot of what sounds like are pretty legitimate concerns from the water management point of view. I would encourage you to work with the residents adjacent to the property between now and the time we see this again, and see if we can maybe get a win-win
Sure.
here.
Yep. Yep.
So-
Any other questions?
Yeah, the water, so the runoff would go southeast down
Correct.
to a retention pond?
We're looking at a detention basin, correct?
But currently, it does go down to a retention pond in another neighborhood, doesn't it?
There is a detention, I guess you would call it a detention basin, just above the next street crossing.
Okay. And has that neighborhood been notified of this development? That would be the southwest side of Lexington Heights area? Because isn't that where this would flow down to?
Yeah, that's just, we could add that to the list, but I did an expanded list to the west and north in this matter, and just surrounding properties to the south and east. We can add that.
Okay.
So they
There
will,
there were a couple,
I mean,
excuse me, there,
if the water runs that way, they should probably be notified, especially if we're proposing any changes north of that.
so they'll have to show, when it comes in for a plat, they'll have to give stormwater calculations, and they'll have to show that it does not increase flooding, and have to show that it handles the flood, the waters on your site, and doesn't make any additional situation worse. In other words, they'll have to show with their calculations. So these are really good questions to talk about right now as part of the rezoning, so that they can be addressed early. But just know that those detailed calculations would happen during a subdivision platting process, so they'd have to show that that is being addressed.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
A question for staff. I guess there were concerns about traffic, and I think it's no secret that this area of town is going to look a whole lot different in the next decade. So I have less concerns about, I guess, the change, because I think the change is going to happen, whether it's this or something else. But are the easements or the right-of-way set up to expand those roads and deal with that change in traffic over time? You mentioned that.
Yeah, Union Road right-of-way is pretty wide. Again, as mentioned before, on the west side, there is kind of a ponding easement for that wild horse. So expansion will have to fit within, outside of that area and along the east side. So that is allowed for future growth, turn lanes and whatnot in that area, like up by 12th Street or the driveway locations. 12th Street, again, it's a little narrow. We want to model to that similar to what is done down the road to the west. So that's what we came up with, 17.5 foot of additional land along the south side of the road that will add some room for additional lanes and turn lanes at that intersection.
This will be a major intersection in town over time, correct? That's anticipated?
So these are two arterial streets, so they're intended to carry the traffic, and the city would be monitoring those as development occurs in the surrounding area to make sure that they're handling the traffic appropriately.
Any other questions or direction from commission members?
We should note, I thought, that this is just for the zoning of the land. It's not the plat for the buildings, or, I know that some of the public has complained about proposed 3 stories, and this isn't part of that. This is just the rezoning of the land at this point, so.
I would say that the density of this corner is going to, it's going to change.
So just to clarify, that with this particular zone, that it is a planned residential zone, and so the request is a rezoning, but this master plan would go along with that. So if there are concerns about the scale of the buildings or what's being proposed here as far as the layout of the site, this would be the time to talk about those things. So,
what level of density is allowed in that planned residential?
RP kind of follows the R4, so that's high density. It's roughly 18 plus units per acre. And that it also allows a mixture of uses from single family to multifamily. Some commercial is allowed in the RP plan. But again, like Karen said, it's based on the concept.
Story limitations in that?
45 feet.
45 feet.
so that it's perfectly within your purview to be considering those factors during this rezoning process.
I guess just to comment on the density, I'm less concerned about the density because I think that's going to change over time. But the stormwater issues are a serious consideration that we need to look at.
I would agree. I think that's probably the biggest issue. In multiple areas, understandably, there's things that are happening in property that's not this particular piece of property, but all influencing one leading to another. Any other comments or direction from commission? Any other questions from staff for clarification or?
So I think we can bring back more information at your next meeting regarding some of these questions brought up by the public.
Thank you. We will move on to our next agenda item of new business. This is the Green Hill Townhomes 2 preliminary plat. And Ms. Lehman, if you would introduce this one.
Thank you. So Panther Farms LLC is proposing to subdivide 5.3 acres of land southeast of the Green Hill and Hudson Road intersection. The area is outlined in the map in red on this slide. This land is part of the 130-acre Green Hill Village mixed-use development that was done in 1998. And if you remember back in this past spring, in April of 2018, an amendment to the master plan of this development was approved to allow for the development of townhome buildings on this site. Here's an image on the right showing the approved concept plan that went along with the master plan amendment back in the spring. On the left-hand side, you'll see the future land use map of that area. As you can see in the planned approved concept plan, there's a street connection going across east to west, as well as a connection to the north, providing additional egress and ingress for the residential development to the south. The area shown in the future land use map shows this area as medium-density residential, so this is consistent to the approved concept plan and the proposal tonight. The preliminary plat that's being proposed is the first step toward developing the site in question. So the proposal follows the layout of the approved master plan as well as the approved concept plan, and it shows a through connection, as I mentioned before, of Lauren Drive, and again a connection of Addison Drive to the north. The preliminary plat proposes to create 1.98 buildable Lot 1, outlined in red on this slide. The remainder of the site will be platted as a tract for future street connections as described. Outlots or future development will also be done, 2 of those, as well as 2 detention basins that will help collect the stormwater and help with the water management. The detention basin, tract B, outlined in blue on this image, will be installed with the creation of Lot 1. It will collect the water runoff from Lot 1, and the outlot in between will be graded in the meantime to help flow, with that water flow to that area. It will also be oversized so as to also service future development on those outlots. A private alley is shown on this plat, and that will service Lot 1 coming south, and sidewalks will be installed on the west and north side of Lot 1, as well as the east side of Tract B. Utilities are readily available to the site, so it is ready for development. I'd like to note that another preliminary plat and final plat will be required once the developer is ready to move forward with development of the other 2 outlots shown on this plat. And at that time, the other sidewalk connections will be installed, as well as the streets will be put in at that time. Just like the previous discussion, I'd like to open it up to both the commission and the public to get feedback on the proposal, and then take it forward to the next meeting for consideration. There are a few minor technical comments that we're working with the developer on, but all within scope and relatively minor.
Thank you. At this point, we'd invite the applicant if they'd like to speak to this item. And we would open it up for any public comment. State your name and address for the record, please.
My name is James Denny. I live at 4622 Hudson Road, but the actual access to these houses, are 3 houses there, is on Norris. I don't know if you know the history of that property back there, but 15 years ago when the developer got a hold of it and was going to develop it, they tried to do an unlimited commercial thing. 500 of us had to get a lawyer and stop it. A couple years later, they tried to they hired a consulting firm, spent taxpayers' money, came up with this big plan, and everybody agreed to it. And it was supposed to be multiple family housing down towards the creek. And they have the U road in there, which they put in. There was supposed to be some nice landscaped office buildings. That never happened. And we were supposed to be buffered with single-family housing. And I've been here before talking about this, but, all of a sudden, we're finally come down after 15 years of this property behind us, and it's not fair because you're going to ruin property value by putting up something like that. And, through the history of this thing going on, I've asked for 10 years, are they going to adjoin my little street that is my access to my house, join it into this commercial stuff or this residential stuff? And I was told no, because I said it's going to be very dangerous. The little street behind me, I'm bordered by 3 streets. Norris is behind me, Harriet's a little street beside me, and then Hudson Road's in front. And when people are cutting that corner, which you can't see because they have bushes 80 feet high. And I stood out there with my friends a couple of times, and 4 out of 5 cars coming around that 90-degree corner just cut it. But the worst thing is pulling onto Hudson Road now, there's 4 times as much traffic as 15 years ago because everything going on. And to pull out of that intersection at night and try to get across there, you can't see any of the traffic coming up. By the time it's up over the hill and you see the headlights, you're out in the middle of it, and it's just a dangerous intersection. So if you keep putting more multi-family housing there, that's just going to get even worse. There's going to be tons more people. There's already people cutting behind me because they put the gas station in, which was not supposed to be in the plan either. And people are already starting to do that, cut through there. So now they're going to have all this other stuff going on. That's just going to make it worse. But, I mean, there are 2 or 3 reasons, personal for me, property value, but also for safety, all the traffic that's going to get worse there. And just going back to what the city had promised back then, they had this whole thing all figured out, but they've kind of gone against it. And I know it's been 15 years, but I've been just waiting to see what's going to happen here. I don't know what it's even zoned now, what they originally zoned it as, is it R2 or what it is.
It's currently zoned MU, that entire area, all 130
That's what I thought. I mean, they did it all at one time. But the whole thing was that even on the corner, the church owned that whole corner there, and as soon as that got sold, there was supposed to be single-family home. That thing all went out, and they put the condominiums in. There's 2 there. I don't know if they're going to put a whole bunch more in there, plus one's behind me. Half that's going to flow out behind my house on that really dangerous corner and then out into that dangerous intersection. And I'm just thinking, how many more of these things do we need? I'm thinking some houses would be nice, but, just something to consider if you drive out there and sit there and watch, or even at night, try to go through that intersection once and just see how comfortable you are trying to pull out of that place, and then think about all the more traffic that's going to be there. Won't be good, but thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to this item?
Tim Hansen. I live on 1517 Athens Court, so this would be my backyard. They're proposing on the next phase, which I don't know if it's going to be single family, but looked like according to the map, there's going to be 4-plex, 5-plex, whatever's going to go up in there, which will take my value down and our neighbors around us as well as far as property value. I have to look out the backyard and seeing a 2 or 3-story townhome like the first ones kind of show for the first phase. We already have water issues from that, just a bare field behind us that comes across my yard and the neighbor's yard and flooded his basement. With these new property, it's just going to funnel that much more with the roof and downspouts coming down that way without having some retainage, water runoff or something is what I'm concerned as well. I'd rather have single family back there, to be honest with you, rather than this big townhome condos, call them what you want. I'm the president of the HOA in our division as well. There's other condos within the neighborhood that we get all kinds of complaints that college kids will rent them. So whether they're for sale, they get bought up and get rented out by college kids. People have parking issues. People complain about snow removal, that cars are parked in the street, and there's most more college kids around those condos. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen behind me is it'll just be more college kids renting those out. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead and close the public comment and ask for commission members.
I'll need to
Questions?
abstain on this item as well.
Thank you.
If I may, can speak to the water concerns that the previous gentleman spoke to. So that is something that staff is aware of and that we were concerned of as well. So actually, this site will be developed with 2 detention basins, and we'll go into that a little bit more in the next presentation, but there'll be 1 less proposed townhome as shown on the approved concept plan, and the site will be graded so that no additional water will flow or hinder those neighboring properties or developments. So the water detention on this site is being considered and being planned for.
Has the city looked at the traffic concerns of the public?
I don't believe so, no.
Have somebody look at that. In terms of the use that you concern, I mean, this kind of project is allowed in that zoning, as we understand it. There's not a lot we can do about that, but we can talk about the specific design as we move forward here. And some of the water and traffic concerns for sure.
Commission, anything else for staff to consider before this comes back to us? Staff, any other questions for us or items we need clarification on? Okay. Any further discussion, questions? We will move on to our last agenda item, the Green Hill Village Townhomes 2 site plan. And Ms. Lehman, if you would give us the background on this one also.
Thank you. So this is actually the site plan for Lot 1 of the preliminary plat that we just looked at. And approval of the site plan will be contingent on the approval of the preliminary plat, as well as a submission and review of a final plat. And this final plat would legally create this lot, so it could be developed. Lot 1 is at the southeast corner of the Lloyd Lane and Norris Drive intersection, outlined in red here in the aerial. Here's again an image of the approved concept plan for this area. And the proposal for Lot 1 consists of that northwest section of that concept plan, showing the two townhomes, 1 4-unit and 1 5-unit building. You can see that what's being proposed follows the concept plan fairly closely. The largest change really being that the private alley connection is going to come off of Lloyd Lane from the north is what's being proposed, as opposed to connecting to the south. And this is largely due to the topography of the site. Turnaround is being proposed to where the future alley would continue to the east, so that if the next phases move forward, there would be an easy transition into those areas. In reviewing a site plan in the mixed-use MU district, there are a number of elements that need to be considered for the site plan, and really they're jumped into 2 groups, site plan elements and facade elements. So I'll go through each of those and kind of touch on the highlights. More details can be found in the staff report. So the proposed use, as noted before, is townhomes, which is consistent with the approved master plan, the future land use map, as well as the concept plan that was approved by council. The proposed height, 35 feet is the maximum height in the MU district, and they're proposing 34 feet, 11 inches. In terms of setbacks, so that's building placement, the proposed locations of those buildings do meet those required setbacks. For parking, generally, I guess the easiest way to summarize it, the requirements is 1 spot per bedroom. Each of these units is proposed to have 3 bedrooms with an optional 4th on the main floor. So technically 3 spots at this time are needed per unit. The applicant is proposing 4 spots per unit, so plenty of parking, and if the 4th bedroom is utilized or added, adequate parking's there for that as well. In terms of access, as I noted before, they're proposing a private alley that will come down from the north and service these two buildings. Sidewalks are both internal and external. In terms of landscaping, 854 points are required. And then for those watching, those points are calculated by a number of trees and shrubs and those type of things. Usually the larger the tree, the higher the point value. So of that 854, the applicant's actually proposing 2,160 points, so over landscaping, which is a great thing. In terms of trash, they're proposing a private contractor to pick up the receptacles. Stormwater management, we discussed that a little bit already. All the water would be funneled over to the neighboring detention basin that'll be put in at the same time. And signage, none is being proposed at this current site. Here's an image of what the buildings will look like, or are being proposed to look like. You have the 5-unit front and back on the far left, the 4-unit front and back in the middle, and then the side elevations on the far right. And just like to note the tuck-under garages on the back sides. So what I'll do, looking at the facade discussion, I'll zoom in or provide a closer image of those 5 units, as the 4-unit buildings really are of the same design. So there's 6 elements in considering a facade review in the MU district. Proportion, you look at neighboring developments in the MU district to see if it's something that's compatible. So 2- and 3-story buildings are typical, really, for the MU district and in the area. And the area does encourage a variety of different housing types. The proposed design breaks up the multi-unit building so that each townhome is clearly distinguishable from the neighboring, and so it feels consistent and proportionate in that sense with single-family homes, so having those individual units called out. The roof line, they're proposing pitched roofs, and that's consistent with the development in the area. Pattern, buildings have a distinct repeating pattern for each unit, both the back and front facades. There's some overhangs and then some recessing elements as well that break up the facade and create a sense of depth. Doors and windows are placed to create a rhythm, consistent rhythm from unit to unit. Material and texture. So to help distinguish between the units, vertical cement board siding will be alternated with horizontal cement board siding between units. A brick liner will be used the areas where the foundation is showing. And the applicant is proposing to use seam metal roofing, which is consistent with the overall district. The color that's being proposed is white, with the brick being gray, neutral colors, which is consistent with the overall district. And then each unit will be given a unique door color, so to help distinguish between them and add additional visual interest to the proposal. Architectural features, they're doing their best to mimic residential kind of feels with porches, balconies, roof line breaks, and those type of details. So in summary, the site plan elements, facade elements do meet our MU zoning code criteria. So with that, just like with the subdivision, I'd like to open it up for discussion and gather any comments from the commission as well as the public, and then bring it back to the next meeting as well.
Anyone present who'd like to speak to this item? Commission, discussion?
Need to abstain from this item as well.
Thank you.
I forgot to mention something, if I can jump in really quickly. So again, just wanted to reiterate that the approval of this site plan will be subject to the preliminary plat being approved. And then again, that a final plat will need to be submitted and approved as well. So this project, this will be tied up to with the other 2 things.
There are no percentage of masonry requirements or anything like that?
Not in this district.
Okay. Seems consistent with the rules that we've set in place.
Any other feedback for staff on this item?
Yeah, I guess just more of the water retention and runoff, what you're going to do with that. You said that you were going to have more in the next presentation. Maybe that was in the previous, but yes.
I can provide more
I
details.
know there were some concerns, yes.
Any other questions from staff?
Not a question necessarily, but kind of not a fun tidbit per se. So the way the land will be graded in a way where the front of the buildings will be perceived as two-story, and the back there'll be a slope, as you can kind of see from the side angle. So then that's where the garage would go, kind of under the house. So it's from certain angles it'll look like a two-story building, and from others it'd be a three-story. So kind of an architectural element to consider and bring to your attention.
I do think that the porches out front and things add a nice feel to it, that's a good addition and good use. Make this a little more interesting, fit in a little bit better with the residential feel.
So they're achieving the 4 parking spaces by using the 2 interior and then the 2 in the driveway?
That's correct, 2 in the garage and 2 in front of the garage. And the driveway is, I think it's 20 by 20, so it does have the room for the two cars.
And that's allowed?
That's permitted, yes. For this type of development, with the calculations, there are 9 units, no visitor parking is required, so they're meeting and exceeding their parking requirement.
Anything else, Commission? Looks like pretty tidy then, based on lack of comments, lack of feedback from this group, that pretty much in order then for the site plan.
Is that one comment on the parking? It seems like it meets the requirements, but in practicality, are people really going to park behind those cars that are in a garage? Or are they going to park on the street?
Is there street parking allowed?
Is there street parking there? Yeah, that was a...
We can clarify, but generally in private alleyways, you wouldn't have parking, but we can look into that.
That would be a question. Okay. We'll continue discussion on that item as well then for the February 13th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Are there any commission updates?
I just want to note that we're a little behind on nomination and election of officers, and so maybe Hillary, you want to make a comment about that?
So we are anticipating having nominations for the February 13th for our next council meeting, so from our nominating committee.
So we have a nominating committee, and they'll nominate people for chair and vice chair, and then you'll vote at the next, so we'll have that on the agenda. The other thing that I noted when I was going through reading back through your bylaws, they haven't been amended in a few years, and I noticed a few things that maybe need to be cleared up and just cleaned up a little bit. And so I think we'll also bring just sort of a redlined version of your bylaws for your consideration at the next meeting. Nothing major, but just some little tweaks to things that we saw in your bylaws to allow a little more flexibility and to clarify the rules about voting that weren't included in your bylaws.
Thank you. That concludes our agenda items. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor of adjournment signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Thank you. We are adjourned.